Gave my life to Jesus when I was 16 years old. And I want to share, 40 years old now. I'm going to share how I got to that point and how it's affected my life and how I've never been the same. Truly, my encounter with God when I was 16 years old was the most life-changing thing that ever happened to me. Give you a brief rundown of the way I grew up. We weren't a religious family in any real sense of the term. We went to church, as most people do, as most people did, especially in those days. Went to church on a regular basis, but church didn't really mean a lot to us. I don't remember any time my parents discussing God with me. If they did, I just don't remember it. It wasn't meaningful enough to me to be lodged in my memory. I do remember praying at the dinner table. We said, God is great, God is good. Let us thank Him for our food. We said that every time we ate dinner, at least. I don't think we said it for breakfast or lunch. We did eat together as a family, which is a good thing for the most part, at least in my younger years. I went to Sunday school, but I don't remember much of it. I do remember that my mom taught Sunday school once in a while. I don't know if she had a Sunday school class or if she was a substitute teacher, but looking back, that's kind of strange because she claims that she never has believed in God, and so it seems strange that she would teach a Sunday school class. But I guess maybe it's not that strange because it turns out that a lot of clergymen, if you will, don't really believe in God. Some have come out and said they don't believe in God, that kind of thing. So there are people out there like that who, even though they teach the Bible, don't believe the Bible. But I do remember sitting in church, and I was one of the kids who would, just like most kids, would draw with their pencil on the offering envelope as we sat there. And we went to a church that I would describe as a church that wasn't very impactful. I don't remember a whole lot of people being serious about their relationship with God. Maybe there were some there that were, but I don't remember it. It just was religion in the sense that that's just the way things were. That's the way we grew up. That's the way my parents grew up, at least my dad. My dad grew up going to a Presbyterian church, and so he wanted us to go to a Presbyterian church, and mostly to instill like moral values in us, that kind of thing. It didn't seem so much that my dad was concerned about God, at least not enough to really instill it into us. Now, my dad did always believe in God, and he later gave his life to the Lord in a more meaningful way, but at that time it didn't seem that it was too meaningful to any of us. When I was a preteen, around that area, my parents were divorced. It wasn't a great experience, but personally I don't remember it affecting me much emotionally at the time. I never was emotionally distraught over my parents' divorce, and I do distinctly remembering that I thought that it would make my parents happier if they were apart, and I did not see that as a bad thing. Only now, as an adult, looking back at my childhood, can I see how the divorce really affected my life and made life, don't want to say more difficult for me, but I think my life could have been better, or I could have been more equipped for adulthood had my parents stayed together. And the main reason I say that is because when parents are divorced, you lose something that you had when your parents are together, and I'm sure it's different for every single person. But for me, it was the fact that I would go to my mom's house one week and then go to my dad's house another week, and so we were 1 week at my dad's house and 1 week at my mom's house. And while it was great that both parents were still in our lives and committed to us, it also made it extremely difficult for them to parent us and discipline us in a way that was meaningful, because we could always just go to the other parent's house, and it wasn't like my mom and my dad were in cahoots with us as far as discipline. And so I think that resulted in us kids being able to do just pretty much whatever we want. We weren't able to do whatever we want at my dad's house. He was a little more strict, although not that strict. But at my mom's house, we pretty much could do whatever we wanted. We had some basic rules. We just had to let her know where we were and that we weren't dead, and we could do whatever we wanted. So I had a childhood, or especially my life when I came into my teen years, where I could be out late doing all kind of stuff, which is never a happy situation. I remember some instances that really could have messed me up, and I thank God that He spared me from really messing up my life and doing some things that I would really regret, even though I did do a lot of things that I do regret. But I think the main takeaway from my childhood is that I was pretty selfish, and I think that my parents probably were a bit guilty about some of the things that happened, the divorce and stuff like that, and so maybe they let us get away with more than we should have. And I think I developed a selfish attitude. Everything was about me, and that's not too atypical. Most kids are like that, unless they're really raised by parents who are taking the time to make sure they're not like that. And so just a real selfishness, just a real idea that everything about me was great, and if something was wrong, it was because of other people. Kind of raised in an environment, especially around my mom, where the way I felt was like of supreme importance, and I think my feelings were a little too much catered to, especially by my mom. And so I was a very inward, very selfish person, just like most teenagers are. I don't think I was the worst of people, but I certainly wasn't a good person in any stretch of the imagination, and was generally looking out for my own well-being, such things like this. So my dad remarried not too long after the divorce, a couple years, I guess, I don't remember, to a woman who was in the hair cutting business and pretty successful. She also involved in that business. There's a lot of involvement in the occult and stuff like that, and so she was a bit involved with the occult. But all that was before she really got involved with my dad, because when she began to get involved with my dad, she had some Christian influences in her life. And these Christian influences had an impact on her in such a way that my dad and my stepmom started going to church. Now, this was different than the religious experiences I had as a younger child, because we were going to things, to church services and church events, where things were a little crazy. I remember specifically as a young man going to an event where everyone was real excited and people were prophesying and stuff like that, and I do remember being pretty emotionally stirred over that and excited about God. I don't remember exactly the whole circumstance of what happened there, but I do remember my brother and my sister and I being really excited about God from that event. And I do remember my brother specifically, my older brother, gathering all of us together to pray, and he was only a young teenager, probably 13 or something like that. And that day, whether or not it's something that's significant or not, I don't know for sure, but I do remember that day that some man prophesied over my brother and I, and he said about my brother that my brother had more of a pastor's heart, but that I, was real interested in sports, but that something would come later in my life that would divert my attention in a spiritual way. And so I would say, that prophecy came true, because I was real involved with sports. I was a pretty athletic person. Played soccer mostly. Also played baseball a lot, especially as a kid. Was doing really well in soccer my sophomore year of high school. Doing so well, as a matter of fact, that I was being asked to move up from the junior varsity team to the varsity team. And when that happened, when my coach told me he was going to move me up to the varsity, that the same day he told me that, I broke my ankle during practice and was not able to play anymore for the rest of the year. As a matter of fact, when that happened and I broke my ankle, I left sports pretty much altogether for the rest of my high school career and pursued theater instead. I began being in all the school plays starting that year because my ankle was broke and I could still do theater. And then every year since, I just did theater, and I was pretty good at it. I starred in almost all of my school plays, which, I guess says something. I don't think it says a whole lot, because my school wasn't really big, and so there wasn't a ton of talent to draw from. And so, the fact that I starred in my school plays doesn't mean I was a fantastic actor, although my mom thought I was pretty good. And so I began to pursue theater, and that was really a dark path for me to go down. Theater is a crazy world, and two of my girls are involved in theater, and I'm very careful about where they go and what they're involved in, because I know what kind of world that is. If people are selfish in other parts of the world, a theater amplifies selfishness. Everybody's in it to be be the best they can be, of course, and be the star, but also there's a whole lot of other stuff happening, a lot of drama, a lot of sexual things that happen behind the scenes. And I'm not saying that kind of stuff necessarily happened when I was in high school, although some of it did. I began to see that kind of pathway as I was doing theater more and more became more evident, to the point where when I was a little bit older, I started to get invited to parties that were pretty bad. Thankfully, God got a hold of me. Hallelujah. God got a hold of me when I was 16, and this was right before my senior year in high school. And just in time, he got a hold of me because I was starting to be more accepted in the crowds in my senior year than I was, or in my junior year, but towards the end of my junior year, than I was as a younger boy, where I was kind of more in the nerdy class and didn't really hang out with the cool kids, or never was really invited to hang out with the so-called cool kids. And so because of that, it kept me from being involved with like drugs and alcohol and stuff like that, because I can't remember anyone ever offering me any kind of drugs or any kind of alcohol. Not until much later in high school, where and I think after I'd gotten saved was the only time I was offered even alcohol, and I didn't take it, because at that point I was saved and I wasn't going to drink, especially underage. So so where was I? So I between my junior and senior year of high school, I was 16 years old, or I was just about to be 16. Actually, it was 15 still. I had to have been. No, I was 16. I'm sorry, because I would have been 17 after I became a senior, because my birthday's in October. So I turned 17 in October of my senior year. But during that time, during that summer, and I don't remember at what point in the summer, but sometime during that summer, I gave my life to Christ. And it happened like this. My parents, my stepmom, my dad, that is, had landed upon a church that they were going to on a regular basis, and this church was really fired up for Jesus. They were really fired up for Jesus. This is during the mid to late 90s, at the time when there was a revival in Pensacola, Florida, that was kind of affecting many of the Assembly of God churches that were around the United States, and it was affecting ours. People were really excited about God. People wanted to serve God. Did we do everything right? Of course not. You know, was everything biblical? Probably not, but biblical enough for me to be absolutely radically and forever changed by an encounter with God that I had at this Assembly of God church in Newark, Delaware, called Praise Assembly. And Praise Assembly was a church where people were just excited about serving God. When I got to church on that Sunday, I felt the love of God in such a powerful way that I was changed. And I remember that morning, I really didn't want to go to church. You know, like I said, I had some experiences with God here and there, but mostly nothing that really stuck, nothing that really made a huge impact upon my mind. Enough to kind of get me excited, but that's about it. And I was, involved with things that teenagers are normally involved in. Maybe they shouldn't be involved in. I do remember one day I was laying in my bed. It was Sunday morning. Of course, since I was going back and forth to my mom and my dad's house, we'd go to church sometime with we'd go to church sometimes with my my dad and my stepmom, but not with my mom. So on Sunday mornings at my mom's house, we'd sleep in. And that particular day, my brother and I were both at my dad's house. I don't know if my brother lived at my dad's house anymore, because at one point my brother decided to move in exclusively with my mom and not stay with my dad anymore. All of us made a decision one way or the other to live with one parent exclusively. And at that point, I think that he had already made that decision to live with my mom. And so, but he was at my dad's house that day for whatever reason. He had spent the night that night. I guess, he still came on weekends or something like that once in a while. But we were both there in our beds, and Sunday morning, my stepmom came in while we were still in bed and still sleeping. And she knocked on the door and asked us if we wanted to go to church. And I remember my brother rolling over and said, I don't want to go to church. And for some reason that day, I just kind of felt sorry for my stepmom. And so I said, okay, I'll go to church. And I got up and went to church that day. And little did I know that that day was going to be the day when my life was forever changed. I went to church that day and sat somewhere towards the back, I guess. I don't remember. I don't remember what the preacher said. I don't remember anything except for the presence of God was very strong in the church that day. And also I experienced the love of God in a way that was very tangible and that was very real for me. I distinctly remember that it wasn't necessarily something the preacher said that convinced me to give my life to Christ. I'm sure he said some things that affected me, but those aren't the things that stick out in my memory. Those aren't the things that I remember, but I distinctly remember the love of God, the presence of God drawing me. And so it was the Holy Spirit drawing me is what it was. And so I went to the front, as is pretty typical in a church like that, when they make an altar call and ask people to come to the front to give their life to Christ. So I went to the front and I got down on my knees, and I think I was the only person that did that day. I don't remember for sure, but it was a Sunday morning. Went down and got on my knees, and if I wasn't there alone, I was alone with God that day. And I was so fixed on God that I had zero thoughts about anyone around me. I was so enamored with the presence of God and what God was doing in my life at that time that I had no consciousness of what people were thinking about me, or what they were, if they were looking at me or anything like that. I just, all that was completely blocked out of my mind. And I remember just talking to God and saying, God, I'm giving my life to you. Today I'll never be the same. And I wasn't. I was 16 years old. I gave my life to Christ, and the change in my life was instant and absolutely radical, very radical. I remember coming home that night, just almost in a daze, like what just happened to me, kind of thing. And I remember thinking that night as I was going to bed, I remember thinking, am I going to be this way when I wake up tomorrow? Or is this just some kind of weird thing that happened to me today? But I did. I woke up tomorrow and I was still changed by the power of God. And I began to seek God. I began to seek God seriously. I began to read my Bible. I bought a Spirit-filled Life Application Bible or something like that, and I read the Bible. I read all the notes that were that were there, and they were helpful to me. I was going to school that year, my senior year. I only had 2 classes. I really kind of had an easy senior year. I only had 2 classes, and one of those classes was drama, and the other class was a earth science class. So it was really, my senior year was a breeze, and my classes only lasted till noon or even before noon, and then after that I went straight to the local YMCA where I was a lifeguard, and I would lifeguard till about 5 o'clock or so, and then I would go home and I'd have the whole evening. So I would go to school and work and still have the whole evening to myself. And many nights, I think most nights during that initial time period, most nights I would go home and I would spend the whole evening just praying and reading my Bible and seeking God. And those were some very formative times, and I remember that God really moved during those times, and God would visit me, and there was times where I'd cry out to God. I especially remember crying out for wisdom and understanding, because I had such a difficult time understanding the Bible. I was never a reader. I hated to read growing up, and I would read the least amount of books I could possibly read. I would not read. And so just reading comprehension was probably not at a very high level for me. But here I had a desire. I wanted to know what God said, and I wanted to know the truth. I had a hunger for the Word of God. So I would cry out to God. And in my bedroom at night by myself in my house in Chesapeake City, Maryland. And one night in particular, I was praying, and God's presence just filled the room. And you know what, if you don't know what that's like, for God's presence just to fill the place where you're at, you're missing out on something that's pretty incredible. Because when it really happens, when it's really real, when God's presence really shows up, it's pretty life-changing. And it's hard to describe, and somebody who hasn't seen it and hasn't been in it, it's hard to understand. But when you really have it, it's life-changing. And so I was having one of those moments. God was moving in my room. It was just me and God. Tears were flowing, and I remember that day I decided to give my life to the service of God. I felt like I was being called to the service of God, and I said, Lord, I want to serve you. I want to preach the gospel. That's what my life's going to be. And that day forward, I felt a call to preach the gospel. Went to Bible school the next year, and just served God constantly. I was always in a church. I was always helping out with a youth group. Always volunteering for just about anything that I could volunteer for. Until the time finally came where I got a full-time position as a youth pastor, as a children's pastor. Did some youth pastoring for a while, and then in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, was when I launched out to do full-time evangelism, which is what I'm doing now. I'm a full-time evangelist, most notably a street preacher, but also doing stuff on YouTube, that kind of thing. So that's my Christian testimony. That's what happened to me, and my life's been changed by Jesus Christ. Bottom line. I'm not religious because I grew up religious. I'm not religious because I thought it was a fun thing to do and would add meaning to my life or anything like that. I just went to church one day, and God showed up and just changed my life. Bottom line. And so that's why I've been committed to God for these many years, is because He showed Himself so strong to me, not just that occasion, but many occasions where I have sensed His presence and heard from Him in seeing him come through in my life. So if you haven't given your life to Christ yet, make sure you do that. Make sure you give your life to Christ. Call out to God. Say, God, my life is not my own. My life belongs to you. It's the best thing I ever did. And from, I made a lot of mistakes before and after I became a Christian, but that's one mistake. What's one thing I never regret is giving my life to Christ. I'm now married. I've been married for over 15 years. Have 5 kids. I'm very blessed, and all the glory goes to Jesus Christ. Thanks for watching.